The ocean was calm. The wreckage of the William Brown had just disappeared beneath the waves. Survivors clung to the only remaining lifeboat, overloaded with more than a dozen souls. The night was black, the cold unforgiving. And that's when Seaman Alexander Holmes stood up and began throwing people overboard. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover the true story of United States versus Holmes, a forgotten legal case that exposed the horrifying boundary between survival and murder. A case that forced a jury to answer one impossible question: when does saving lives become taking them? On April 19, 1841, the American ship William Brown struck an iceberg off the coast of Newfoundland. Over 80 passengers, mostly poor Irish immigrants heading for Philadelphia, died instantly in the freezing Atlantic. But about 40 survivors managed to escape in 2 lifeboats. One was the captain's cutter, well equipped and safely manned. The other was a smaller, open lifeboat with no provisions, overloaded with 41 people. A seaman named Alexander Holmes was placed in charge. As night fell and temperatures dropped, the overloaded boat took on water. Panic rose. People screamed. It was then that Holmes and another sailor began forcibly removing passengers, throwing at least 14 men and women into the sea to prevent the boat from sinking. The people cast overboard included women and possibly children. There was no formal system, no lottery, just chaos, fear, and decisions made in the dark. According to survivor accounts, Holmes acted with grim determination. He reportedly said, "If you don't go overboard, we shall all perish." The other seamen, steers, followed his lead. No one resisted. Some passengers sobbed quietly as others were tossed out one by one. When they were rescued the next day by another vessel, only 17 people remained in Holmes's boat. He admitted to casting passengers overboard, but was it murder or necessary sacrifice? Holmes was arrested in Philadelphia and charged by the US federal government, but notably not with murder, only manslaughter. The legal system had no clear rule for what to do when survival demanded killing. There was no US precedent for such a case. Would jurors convict a man who arguably saved more lives than he took? The trial became a legal and moral spectacle. The courtroom was packed. Newspapers covered the proceedings daily, calling Holmes a reluctant executioner or a cold-blooded butcher, depending on the editorial. The defense built their case around necessity. They argued Holmes had no choice. The boat was sinking. If he hadn't acted, everyone would have died. He was a sailor trained to protect his passengers, and in that moment, he made an agonizing decision to preserve the many over the few. The prosecution saw it differently. They pointed out that Holmes was not the ship's captain, nor was he formally authorized to decide life or death. They argued that there was no attempt at fairness, no drawing of lots, no reasoned deliberation, just panic and power, Holmes using his strength to throw the weakest into the sea. Jurors struggled. They were not just weighing evidence, they were staring into a moral abyss. Could anyone act rationally under those conditions? Was Holmes a murderer or a man crushed by duty? In the end, Holmes was found guilty of manslaughter, but sentenced to just 6 months in jail and a $20 fine. It was a verdict that shocked some and satisfied others. The jury had judged him guilty, but not evil, wrong but not damned. Legal scholars would later call it a compassionate conviction, a recognition that law must sometimes bend but not break when humanity is tested beyond its limits. United States versus Holmes became one of the first American cases to test the necessity defense, the idea that breaking the law may be justified to prevent a greater harm. But the case left a trail of unresolved questions. Would the outcome have been different if Holmes had drawn lots? If the people thrown overboard had resisted? If a captain, not a seaman, had given the order? The Holmes case remained an uneasy precedent. 4 decades later, in 1884, R.V. Dudley and Stevens would revisit these same issues after 2 British sailors killed and ate a cabin boy to survive. That case ended in a murder conviction, rejecting necessity as a defence. But Holmes's story came first, and its shadow has lingered over maritime law, ethical theory, and emergency protocols ever since. Law schools still teach United States v. Holmes not as a clear rulebook, but as a warning, a reminder that desperation warps morality, that courts must weigh not just facts, but fear, motive, and the crushing weight of survival. After his sentence, Holmes disappeared from public life. No memoir, no interviews, just silence. The passengers he cast into the sea were never named in court. Their identities, like their bodies, lost to the Atlantic. But the ripple of what happened on that lifeboat reached far beyond it. For decades, sailors whispered about the Holmes Rule, an unspoken warning that leadership at sea carries consequences. That survival may cost more than life itself. That even in the middle of the ocean, the law's watching.